We are live, and people are going to slowly come on eventually. So, hey everybody, I am here in New York, and I head back to Ukraine in 2 weeks. And so I am here with the one and only Natasha, and so we've been following each other for a while. And so as people come on, Natasha, just give us a little intro about yourself.
So I am basically first and foremost a mother. I'm a mother of two. I have a 21-year-old in college and I have a 9-year-old. So very big difference in age gaps and genders and everything. But I am also just a professional who works in tech and cybersecurity. So my previous role was working on the Biden Harris and then Harris Walz campaign. I did IT for them. And now I am doing IT professionally on the side. However, my main interest really is just advocacy, and I just have a passion for calling things out and keeping it real, especially in these times. I have two kids, and this is not the country or the future that I signed up for them to have. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what we do because I truly believe that they're the future and we need to make sure we're paving the way for them because the people in this world um, are not doing that so well. And so that's just very important, is that our future, they have a chance. They deserve a chance.
Right on. Yeah, yeah, that's really great. And so it's interesting, your background. You worked on the Harris Walz campaign. And by the way, guys, we're going to be talking about Ukraine and Witkoff and all that. That's what we're primarily going to discuss today and talk about how that's impacting US politics. Um, however, like I'm really interested in talking with you about what it was like to spend so much time trying to get uh, Kamala Harris elected, and particularly because I have my own thoughts of what type of Ukraine policy that she would have in particular, and I want to share my thoughts with you to see if you agree with that. Before we get into the Wickoff thing, where in which he pretty much advised the Kremlin on how to get the upper hand on his friend, right? I mean, just think about that. Like, I don't know about what this man thinks about friendships, but if my homeboy and my homegirl told my adversary, this is how you get through to Terrell, I don't know, these people are pathological. But um, but we would be in a whole different situation if Harris and Walls were in the White House. So from your standpoint, given world affairs right now, particularly what's going on in the Ukraine, how does it feel for you to be sitting by and watching Trump drive this country to the pits of hell? Yeah.
How does it feel?
Yeah. How does it feel for you, given that you worked on that campaign? Yeah.
Yeah. When I when the election was called, I was devastated. My 9-year-old, 8-year-old son, literally dropped to the floor the morning after it was called and was sobbing and saying this wasn't supposed to happen. Um, because he's woke.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything that we had just fought so hard for and how much we accomplished in 107 days. And my thing was like, you people know better. You people know better. You people know what's about to happen, because for me, it's fresh. And I guess at that time, I didn't realize a lot of people really forget we are the United States of amnesia. I didn't forget. I had anxiety every single day when he was in his first term. I remember how it felt to go to bed and wake up fearful of what happened. Like I knew this was all going to happen. I knew it was going to be worse and I just shut everything out. I didn't want to hear the news. Anybody who tried to tell me things that were happening, like, "Oh my gosh, did you know Trump was," I didn't wanna hear it. Like, I just didn't want to hear it because I told you. I told you so. I told you so. I just didn't wanna hear it. But then I guess, again, stuff started getting so crazy that it got to the point where I woke up quick. My sister sent me a video of, like, AOC telling everybody, this was, like, in early spring or something, that we were gonna get through this and, you know, reciting law and, now we're here and this is crazy. But, yeah, so that's how I feel. I mean, it's just an anxiety-inducing time. It feels really wild to be alive when all of this is occurring. I guess I never thought that I would see this in my lifetime, this
Yeah,
shift in multipolarity and this
yeah,
a Trump as a dictator in the United States. It's not something I would have been able to
right.
fathom.
I'm gonna tell you. Listen, I'm gonna tell you the conversations that I've had with Ukrainians about this, and what's really unique about my conversation with Ukrainians, and this can be in classrooms because I do a number of lectures around the country. And in fact, in in February of next year, during Black History Month, I am going to lead a discussion in Western Ukraine with the mayor of the largest city in Western Ukraine about race in America with a focus on Trump and Ukraine. And what I'm constantly hearing these conversations is we did not know that America would do this. We did not think that America, given what we understand about American democracy, that they would behave this way. First, I have to really uh, measure the conversations with them by saying that 90% overall of Black people voted for Kamala Harris. It's the rest of the country that's different. So we believe in democracy. We believe in all these virtues. And when you start looking at white people, whether it's white women, whether it's young white people, and you go into Latino population and et cetera, those are the people where you start seeing shifts towards Trump. And so I had to tell them how important race is when you really think about why Trump got elected. And the fundamental issue is that I truly don't believe that the vast majority of white people want democracy. I don't believe it. And the reason why I don't believe it is that both of us come from peoples, we both Black. And it was only 60, Jim Crow wasn't democracy. And so before we get into these conversations, I think it's important for us to frame what America really is. And so both of us, any Black person, if you really want to be honest with it, is that up until 1968, which I think was the passage of the Fair Housing Act, because there's the Fair Housing Act, there's the Voter Rights Act, and there's the Civil Rights Act, where those were the signature pieces of legislation, right, that really helped to get America to the democracy that we know today. And it took several years for those acts to get into place. So roughly it's around 1970. And so we've only been the functioning democracy as we know it for the past 55 years. And so we've always been in this very vulnerable position. So it doesn't come to any surprise that Donald Trump would come through as victorious in 2016 with collusion from the Russians. I'll never forget an article that was written in 2016 around December. The reporters in Louisiana, and it was talking about how a lot of Trump supporters didn't care that Russia colluded. And in fact, the kicker of this article was that by one guy, he said, so what if Russia colluded? If they help to defeat Hillary, then I'm fine with it. So everything in this news cycle reflects that. And when I talk to Ukrainians, uh, one of my larger lectures was at Taras Shevchenko University, which is the largest university in Ukraine. and it was in the capital Kiev. I told them this, and so I think the framing is important because if you look at it that way, then none of this really should surprise us, right? So let's get into like the latest news where the Wall Street Journal, they wrote this very long article, right, where they were saying that the motivation behind the peace talks has very little to do with actually bringing a peace towards Ukraine, but it has more to do with business deals. And so the article was titled "Make Money, Not War: Trump's Real Plan for Peace in Ukraine." And it carries this subhead: "The Kremlin pitched the White House on peace talks through business." Okay, that's the subhead. And basically, the president and Trump in office and his envoy, which is Steve Witkoff, they're on board with this, right? And so in the article, it discussed like these meetings over several months between top US and Russian officials that shaped out an agreement where in exchange for the two sides, Russia and the US, forget about Ukraine, just Russia and the US,
Right.
just talk, just divvying up Ukraine basically, right? Isn't this some colonialism shit? Straight up colonialism, right? They were divvying up plans for U.S. companies to get exclusive rights to energy, raw materials, and strategic metals mining across Russia and the Arctic, right? Because that's what they want to do. They want to resume the relationships with Russia so they can keep the money coming. U.S. companies will lead the investment and reconstruction in Ukraine to become the commercial guarantors of peace. So the idea is that as long as these U.S. companies are in Ukraine, then nothing bad is going to happen, right? So that's the whole idea of it. And the frozen Russian assets and European banks, they would be used to help fund these ventures. And so they don't want these frozen assets just for the sake of Ukraine. They want these frozen assets to go into contractors' pockets, Trump's buddies' pockets. Okay, and so it's a very long article, but that's essentially what it is. So this is a very kleptocratic, colonial um, approach to negotiations, and it makes sense because there are a bunch of real estate people who have no diplomatic experience whatsoever. So that's pretty much what it is. It's colonialism, or under another name.
What's the other name?
Well, the other name, we're used to talking about Africa like this. So let's just start this. So we're not used to hearing quote unquote white people talking about how you carve up other quote unquote white people's lands, right? So that's the first thing. And so, and you've read my work. I have a very nuanced conversation about how we refer to Ukraine in white. Like you've read the work on that. So that's another conversation. But the issue here is that the other name is that we are not used to talk. It's usually stuff that we think about with Africa or think about in the Middle East, right? When you think about the oil, think about exploiting oil, or you think about America's takeovers of governments, etc. We're not used to hearing this about European countries or Eastern European countries. So that's the other name to it.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, a lot of that's why, I ask you because I'm so curious about what relations are like out there and to know that, I think you said Ukrainians are like the black people of Europe, like they get treated in a way, the way that black people get treated here in America, like they're dismissed, it's just like Putin has no care for them as a people, as anything, Um, they're just in the way, I feel like. And um, I think these talks with Witkoff and Kushner that keep occurring, I believe this is Witkoff's now sixth visit to Moscow this year.
Yes, a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess he thinks Putin's a nice guy as well. And I think that it's quite obvious what's happening in our faces with the Kushners and the Witkoffs and
What is Kushner doing there?
Bitcoin, right? Aren't they doing the meme coin, the crypto stuff? There's just a lot of things entwined here. And another thing that I wanted to ask you about, we don't have to talk about it now, but I have been trying to figure out what occurred from Elon's dad and his talks with Putin in Moscow a few months ago. I'd never heard anything after that. And this was around the time where it was like the Trump and Elon breakup, and Trump was, angry and going after him. And Russia said that they were going to grant Elon asylum. And
Oh yeah, yeah,
Elon's
yeah,
dad flew
yeah.
out to Moscow to talk to Putin for some reason.
You know what? Though, I didn't. But I know I've heard about it, but I don't really know about it in depth to really give you some like deep insight. It's something we could talk. That'd be another good conversation. For another time. I just don't have it in my mind to really get in depth
Yeah.
into it. But um, look, here's the thing. None of these. When you look at the people, the negotiators that Russia brings to the table, they're the same people from over the past 2 decades. Just and just in general, it just shows you the difference between authoritarian type of governments versus democracies where you're constantly flipping people out. So Putin has seen roughly 4 or 5 U.S. presidents. So I'm not even saying that that's a good model because for us, it isn't. But what I am saying is that the people that Russia brings to the table have been doing this for decades, and they're highly competent diplomats. And as somebody that worked on a political campaign, you know that someone like Kamala Harris, they're going to bring out the most experienced people that you can think of who are available to be at those tables. Whereas with Trump, he just brings his business partners who don't have any ideological framework about how the world should function. They come there because they have an idea how their pockets should be filled.
Right.
And so we already knew that they were going to function this way because we saw Trump's first term. Okay, we saw it, so we already knew it. But a vast majority of American society, i.e., white people, i.e., a lot of Latino people, i.e., a lot of men, okay, just said, okay, we'll have another round of this. And so so what's happening? Why do we really need to care about this? We really need to care about this because what you're saying is that in the most virtuous or the most good faith way, America, which is the world's remaining superpower, and we can have a conversation about what superpower means and how that's going to, and does that term really matter now, in the context of China, et cetera. But it's the lone superpower, and what you're saying is that for the right price, we are for sale, and other people are for sale. That's essentially what it means, and also what it means is that if I can become president, then I can operate on the best interest of myself and I don't have to follow the law. And so everything that, because by the way, there's so many things that Trump has already been doing that's just completely illegal. But with this, but with Witkoff, for example, he's saying that we don't care about these children. There are tens of thousands of Ukrainian children who've been kidnapped, put into Russia, who've been kidnapped into Russia. And none of that matters. Remember when that woman, Irina Zarutska in North Carolina, was killed? She was framed not as a Ukrainian refugee, but as a white woman, right? Over the past couple of weeks, there have been a number of airstrikes against Ukrainian cities where these quote unquote white women have been killed, but you've heard Trump say nothing about them. You have a lot of conservatives who are saying that I don't want my tax dollars going over to support a meaningless war. Well, first of all, there's very little support going to Ukraine right now. Very little. I mean, the primary thing that's really going there is intelligence sharing. But other than that, we're not really giving the Ukrainians anything. We aren't. And the Patriot missiles that desperately are needed to protect their skies from these airstrikes aren't going there. Because the focus, according to this Wall Street Journal report, is that it is about money. And that's the reason why he wants this peace deal to go quickly, because you've heard me talk about, I thought that, hey, he wanted a Nobel Prize. Well, forget the Nobel Peace Prize given out. They were never going to give it to him. But yeah, he wants that for his ego purposes, but primarily he wants peace, quote unquote peace, because he wants to fill his pockets. That's where we are.
And peace equals control of Ukraine, correct?
Peace controls peace financially, yeah, financially, yeah, because he doesn't. The thing about it is that Trump does not care about. Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. He doesn't care about his future. He doesn't care about the European Union. He doesn't care about NATO. He doesn't care about any of these things. What he does care about is, is whatever business deal that he can get out of it. So in these recent talks, you have Jared Kushner at the table. What the
Why?
fuck business does he have at a table negotiating a peace settlement with Ukraine? What does this man know about Ukraine? What does this man know about the Middle East? But that didn't stop him from being in deals with the Saudis, right? The Saudis who killed a journalist that sought refuge in the United States who worked for the esteemed Washington Post just completely killed a man
Saw
in
his bones, didn't he?
yes, in the
Yeah.
embassy. But this Jared Kushner is there talking about Ukraine. When I saw that image of Rubio, Witkoff, and Marco Rubio, who's the U.S. Secretary of State, who's a punk, okay, and then you had Jared Kushner on the side. It was almost like there's like this image of a skeleton that's draped in a cape. He's just like
The
the
Grim
pres.
Reaper.
Yeah, the Grim Reaper. Like that's how he looks, because anytime that man is at the table, nothing good happens for the person on the opposite side, unless you're the Saudis, because the Saudis have somebody that they can manipulate. Somebody they have Jared Kushner in their pocket. I mean, yeah, they're giving them tens of millions of dollars at least, but that's nothing to the Saudis because they live on oil. So if I am a Ukrainian there, I'm thinking, what, what? First, I'm in the shell shock because they have this image of America that they thought existed, but frankly, I never believed did, because we were always on this fragile grounding anyway. And so that's where we are. And like, we are at this state where for the next 3 years, Trump is pursuing a business deal for his partners, for his business partners and his friends. That's what's happening over the next 3 years.
The
That's
big
all it is.
grift. The big grift.
It's a grift.
That's what I call it. The big grift.
And yeah, it's not diplomacy, it's grifting. And so what does this mean for the Ukrainians? That's the most important thing, because I don't think any of this stuff matters. What's happening in Ukraine is that no one honestly believes that if they stop fighting, that this war will end. No one believes that. And I can tell you that people actually do want the war to end. And it's because I don't think people really appreciate what it means to live in a country where you constantly hear drones fly over your head that are deployed to kill people. I can tell you so many nights where you honestly get used to it. And I would say at least half of my friends are on anxiety medication just so they can sleep through it. Now, I can I can sleep through it.
Yeah.
I can sleep through it.
I'm pretty
And
tough.
when it gets really loud, I would just go to my bathroom because if the windows break, then the wall, you have those four walls in your door that can protect you. Because I don't have a shelter under my building. But people want the war to end, but they know under these terms where they have to give up everything that they're going to be fighting in the next 3 years or so. So that's where we are. I think that we're going to be playing this back and forth over the next 3 years, and I don't think anything um, significant is going to happen. And even if a quote unquote peace deal is signed, then in the next 2 years, there's going to be some new fighting. And one more thing before I stop is that in there's this region of Ukraine, Donbass, and there are two major towns there that are heavily fortified, and it will take the Russians years to really take it. Like it's just super, super, super fortified. Why would the Ukrainians just say we're going to give this up and let the Russians just walk in? And then if they take those positions, then it makes them easier to go after Kyiv. It's just stupid. So even if Ukrainians want the war to end, which they do, they can't stop where they are because they're literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like they literally are. And so I just the Ukrainians, they're playing nice on TV, but inside the country, people know and they expect for the next 3 years, at least, they're going to fight and just hope that Democrats the Democrats win the White House. That's their only refuge because this party now they're not Republicans. This is not the John McCain Republican Party. This ain't even fucking Reagan. Okay, this ain't Reagan even. If John McCain were a Republican, look, I don't vote for Republicans. I wouldn't vote for them, but we wouldn't have this.
No. Yeah. And that's basically what I suspected is that, I'm sure that Zelensky knows better. I'm sure he knows that this is all a farce and that, he's not even included in his own peace talks. That's the most bizarre part to me is that everything is being discussed between Russia and the USA, and we'll let you know what we come up with. It's just so like Godfather mobby, but like they're not as slick or good looking or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Like you don't look at them as like smart, but I mean, I guess they kind of are, but at the same time, it's just they know the right people in power and they all have one motivation. And, Putin has been wanting multipolarity for years and now it's occurring. And Trump was the perfect person, whether or not he was ever had ever become an official asset. He is definitely an asset. He is
Yeah, yeah.
allowing them to get away with everything that they want. And these peace talks and discussions, every single time, it just ends up being the same thing. It's just a joke to me. It's just obvious. Like the sixth time Steve Witkoff's gone out there. How many times have we gone through this charade
Hmm.
where we promise, I'm going to be hard on Putin, and then nothing happens, and then it's just the same cycle. And Zelensky keeps taking it, and I feel like he gets it though. I feel like he's putting on his show, like acting like okay,
He's an actor
he's an actor, yeah,
and a
and
comedian.
right, yeah, and I feel like he gets it. I don't feel like he's being played. I feel like he is just, like, okay, this is where you stand. Well, we just have to keep doing what you're doing because, like you said, the whole reason this war started is because Russia invaded in 2022. So if it weren't for that and it weren't for them trying to take something that wasn't theirs to begin with, we wouldn't be here. So for them to
Yeah.
now agree to this 28-point peace plan, which is
Which
give
was
us
drafted
everything
by
that
the
we want.
Russians.
Right. Give us everything that we want, and we'll call it a deal. And that's what it's been every single time. La-
Maximalist.
right. And last time there was a like hurry up and get it done, basically, like not will you do it and do it quickly or else. So yeah, that's what I'm
Yes.
trying to figure out is
Yeah.
what is the or else. But
Yeah. I mean, but here's the thing, right? So with Zelensky, Zelensky is not in a real position of strength because it's not just of Donald Trump and his collusion with Russian business interests, but it's also because the Europeans are not picking up their slack either. So I don't know how much you understand or are aware of European or EU politics, but I feel like the Russians over the past 2 to 3 decades um, have shown have shown that this is what they're going to do. So Angela Merkel, who was a longtime chancellor of Germany, her whole approach was we're going to economically integrate you into the Western financial system, and so they were part of the G8. They were part of these world organizations, and so the more Russia infiltrated, the more Russia just pulled down their pants and took a big dump on everything, right? So it so what Trump but there's something different with what Trump is doing versus Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel naively truly believed that if we for lack of a better word, right? Angela Merkel believed that if we civilize the Russians, right? And even with the Russians, I don't particularly like the term, but like if we civilize them, then they'll behave better. They won't be doing what they're doing right now because they'll see the benefits of being a part of the West. And so they will stop their colonial conquest. And so if they're financially a part of our of Europe, then the hope is that we can indoctrinate them into our way of thinking. Like that was her long term vision, and we know that that did not work, right? And so that's one thing. But what Trump is doing, he doesn't have an ideological outlook. We can criticize Angela Merkel and say that her calculus was wrong, but she had a calculus that she truly believed had a long term positive effect for the rest of Europe, particularly its financial and military security. She did operate with good faith, even though it was wrong. Trump never operates in any good faith other than his own financial interests. Okay. And so someone saying that she's no longer, Lauren says she's no longer the chancellor of Germany. Yeah, I know she's not. I don't know if you're talking to other people, but I know she's not the chancellor of Germany. I'm just talking about the fact that she's been chancellor. She was chancellor for about 3 or 4 terms. And so her impact in I think that his history behind her attempts to integrate Russia into Europe are important context. That's all I'm saying. That's the reason why I brought her up. But what Trump is doing is all for himself. And when I talk about Russia, and I have a master's degree in Russian and Eastern European politics, so I can get into the contours of why of the politics of it all, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to draw on that because so much of why we're in this position has a lot to do with what you observed during the 2000s. What you as somebody who was a part of a campaign in 2024, which is unlike Joe Biden, we, the vast majority of the American people decided that they wanted an autocrat as a president. And this is what autocrats do. The reason why Trump cannot be an ultimate autocrat is because because of our institutions of, the judiciary and et cetera, right? So and it's holding together by a thread. It's holding together by a thread. And it impacts the rest of the world. I'm going to take a brief digression from Russia and point up north to the Prime Minister Carney of Canada. And this has to do with trade. And Carney said, at some point, we thought about America being our long term primary strategic economic partner. No more. Why am I bringing this up in the context of our conversation about Ukraine? It's because what Carney's basically said is that we not only trust the American political establishment, we don't trust Americans. You all don't make good choices. That's what he said without saying it. You don't make good choices, and those bad choices hurt us. We're not going to, so we're not going to feel it. Well, we're starting to feel it now, but we start feeling this 10 years from now when Trump is no longer in office or likely dead, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's my personal opinion that that man has early stages of dementia or some type of mental decay in his brain.
I mean, he's been talking about death a lot lately. He's been very morbid and, about going to hell and this MRI. And now he doesn't even know what area of his body they got an MRI in. And I mean, there's multiple places it could be, but generally it's usually the brain. Um, I mean, I I don't know. Something's up, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk to you about Kamala Harris. I want to get your opinion about this. Um, because I really don't believe that the war in Ukraine is going to shift decidedly in their favor until 2029, after what I hope will be a Democrat that will win office. The question is, of the potential people who are going to run for office, who would be better for Ukraine? Because you have the guy out in Arizona. I forgot his name, the astronaut. His name evades me right now, but he's a U.S. Senator, Mark something. He's a U.S. Senator out of Arizona. He's likely going to run for president. You have Mark Kelly. Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Laura. Mark Kelly. Yes, right. And then you have Gretchen Whitmer out of Michigan, and then you have our guy out in California, who is who pretty much says I'm thinking about, but we all
Newsom.
knew that Galvin Newsom is going to run for president, right? As far as I'm concerned, he is probably the front runner. And so and Kamala has made a decision about if she's going to try again. But I think of all the people who could potentially run, you got Cory Booker, but I think that's another conversation. Okay. But
Oh,
but
no.
that's another conversation. That's another conversation, right? But of all the people who I think about the strongest policy against Russia, I believe it will be Kamala Harris. Why? Because she found her voice during the whole Russiagate hearings when she was grilling people about Russian interference. So, of all the things that she ran on as a senator, when she got into the Senate in the hearings, that prosecutor in her came out and that I'm going to go in on you. Like that really was her. That really was her coming out to America as a U.S. senator. And so, also she was a lead in the negotiations during the presidency. I think that's having her cover the border was a big mistake. I just don't think that that's something that you give a vice president. That was just a put her in a terrible position. When, but I definitely believe that President Kamala Harris, at minimum, would continue what Biden is doing and would advance it to some degree. But I don't see anyone else taking up that mantle because of the whole culture of America right now. I think it's going to be very domestic based. Um, and so Lauren said, I don't think that she should run again. I think she's heartbroken that she lost. But
Did you read the book?
no, I didn't read a book.
I didn't read it yet either.
No, I didn't.
But
But here's the thing. I think that Kamala would have been a better. I think she would. She right now, if we could just skip an election, which we don't skip elections in America, we shouldn't. I hope we don't skip our election. Right?
yeah, we'll
But
see what happens.
right, we'll see. Yeah, but I think that she would be our best shot against Russia and the best supporter of Ukraine. I want to get your thoughts.
I don't feel like I could really speak to that. Personally, I don't know because I'll say that I kind of checked out when Biden was president because after all of the, like we talked about earlier, anxiety inducing and fighting and advocating and volunteering and just being terrified and then COVID and all of these things. Um, I just wanted a break, like I felt like I was on 10 all the time. So I kind of checked out. Um, and then once I got the opportunity with the DNC, which was amazing, um, I kind of got thrust back into it, and I found my joy again, which is in advocacy and speaking out and things like that. And um, so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I was there. That's was very important to me. But as far as like her foreign policy, I I can't really say I paid close attention to that because we were in like this weird bubble, and you would think that
Yeah,
working
that's
on a
true.
campaign, you would know what's happening on the outside. Especially, I feel like I pay very close attention to what's happening around me, but
That makes
my
sense.
life became the campaign, and that's just all it was. And
Yeah, I
it's not like
got
I was being overworked, but it was just, it meant a lot to me. So, it was grueling, but it was
you. Yeah,
exciting and all of those things. But I can't speak to like her foreign policy because I didn't really,
yeah, I got you.
I
So
don't know. Yeah. But,
yeah, yeah, Kamala was definitely of all the people who could potentially run, she's definitely the best that we have. And I'm just concerned that because of the domestic focus, when you think about ICE, it's people. The I just don't see Gavin Newsom caring about Ukraine. I just don't. I also have concerns about his rubbing elbows with far right extremists and misogynists, and yeah, there's just something about him that I'm just not particularly comfortable with on a wide range of things. But so here's a kind of a summary of it all. Steve Witkoff, he's currently in Moscow right now, and he, I believe he's currently in Moscow. Let me double
yes,
check.
no, they're meeting right now.
Yeah, I mean right there. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, he's definitely in Moscow right now. Yeah, yeah. So basically, you're going to, for everyone that's listening, you
Jared
are
Kushner.
in Kushner. You're going to hear post meeting. Um, they're going to be post meeting press conferences talking about things went well. It was productive. What is really happening is they're talking about how to divvy up Ukraine for their own particular financial interests and
Business.
business. And Lauren asked, why is Kushner there? It's business. The same reason that Kushner is in meetings with the Saudis so that he can fund his real estate ventures.
It's literally all money and all business. That's all that
Right. And that's
matters.
what Jonathan said. Jonathan Campbell said the same thing. Yeah, he's there for money. And so this is these are these are these meetings that are taking place in Moscow are more about brokering business. They're financial transactions. They're not really dialogues and diplomacy because they're not diplomats. could you imagine if Kamala Harris said, I'm going to appoint my buddy who's a real estate tycoon to lead conversations about Ukraine? First of all, when you think about this part of the world, it'd be one thing if, let's just say, Steve Witkoff was the ambassador to, I don't know, a country like Jamaica or Greece, because they're not considered frontline countries, right? And so you notice this even in the US State Department, where diplomatic appointments are made. You send your seasoned diplomats to Beijing, you send them to Moscow, right? You send them to these really, you send your seasoned people to these tough areas because those people are bringing their best, right? And so the people who gave you, who raised millions of dollars for you, you send them to Paris, all right? You send them to places like Finland, or a place where if you fuck up a little bit, the world is not going to turn upside down. Trump is doing the direct opposite. But if you really think about it from his perspective, it's not a, for us, it's stupid and ridiculous because we care about diplomacy. But from his standpoint, he's sending people who he has a relationship with, who he has a track record of earning money with, to do what he intends to do in the first place with Ukraine, which is to pimp off of their grief. There is not much of a distance between the Donald Trump who in the 1970s was sued by the Justice Department for discriminating against Black people and trying to displace Black people out, like not letting them rent in their houses, to the man who is looking at Ukraine as a potential real estate venture.
That's all it is.
They're not, but what I'm saying is like the type of evil and racism that Trump displayed in the 1970s of discriminating against Black people, there's not too much of a distance between what he's doing in Ukraine. So my whole approach to talking about Ukraine, it's, I don't sound like the typical person that's at the US think tank, right? Because I just can't think about this from this mere kind of white male lens. There's so much that's involved. There's so much domestic stuff, the racism, the sexism that permeates in the foreign policy that you have to acknowledge it because that's what's informing it.
Can I interject and
Yeah, of course.
mention, because I almost forgot to mention, is that Russia, did you hear that Russia has been enlisting Kenyans under the guise of doing contract work, like construction or building, and then they'll fly them to Moscow. And once they get to Moscow, all of a sudden plans change, and all of a sudden they get army uniforms and they are forced to go fight against Ukraine. Um, have you heard about that?
Yeah, I mean, but they've been
Okay.
doing that though. That's something that's been
Okay.
happening since the start of the war. So so what Natasha is talking about, guys, is this recruitment or forced mobilization of Africans into the Russian forces. And so there are hundreds of people, at least that we know of, that of Africans who have been forced or tricked into joining the military. And so what they do is they target people who have some type of ongoing legal issue. So if they need their papers renewed for their residency, then they'll say, hey, or in one
Or
case,
they'll even promise them citizenship or passport visas or
yeah, they
whatever.
do all of that,
Yeah.
but what they do, like their first target is to target people who don't understand Russian language or reach out to people who they know are financially desperate. And so a lot of people who are coming from the continent of Africa into Russia, they first of all see Russia as a first destination before they hopefully go to Europe, because they don't necessarily want to stay in Russia. They just want to go to a place that's better than where they've come from. And a lot of these people come from poverty. They come from places where, like many of these people, wherever they are from on the continent, they don't want to be there. And so what they do is they find the places who have the easiest visa regimes where they can go. And so for them, Russia is Europe, or right. And so then from that point, there's one guy, and I'm not saying this is the case for everyone because it's not, but there's one guy from the continent who was selling drugs and he got caught. And what they did was say, okay, we can just get rid of your case and we will just send you to the front, or you'll just work as security. And then what happens in reality is that they give them a week or two of training on how to fire a gun and give them basic military tactics, and they send them to the meat grinder where they're either captured or killed. Yep. And so that there are hundreds of people. There are, in fact, prisoners of war in Ukraine who are in this predicament. In fact, when I return to Ukraine, one of my objectives is to interview one of these Africans who found themselves in this situation, but it's so common, and it's not that different from how they treat their ethnic minorities. And so a lot of their ethnic minorities are Asians because Russia colonized Siberia, which is Asia, okay, because Siberia is not indigenous Russian land. And so there are ethnic minorities in Russia who are on the verge of extinction, but they tap those communities because if they tap the middle class Russian community, then Putin fears that there will be a revolt against not only the war but his power. Because right now, so long as the right people are being killed and the wrong people really don't care about the war. They don't because at the end of the day, it's affecting them and making things inconvenient, but it's not really helping them in the vast in the lion's share of Russians support it. But if middle class Russians from St. Petersburg and Moscow and Saratov and other urban areas are tapped to go into this war, then they'll revolt, not because they are against the war in Ukraine, but because it's directly targeting them and they don't want to die for Putin's imperial ambitions. But this thing with the Africans is common, and the Russians actually have waged an extensive propaganda campaign on the continent of Africa, and the main focus is Western imperialism, which is true, right? So we talk about reparations for Black Americans here. It's my belief that America, along with Europe, we owe Africa reparations. I don't see how we as Black people in America who've been kidnapped from the continent of Africa are getting the reparations, but the Africans are left out. That doesn't make sense to me. But at any rate, it's really, it requires a lot of intellectual dexterity to navigate these things because on one hand, the Russians do exploit a truth that the West raped and pillaged and exploited the continent. That's true, but what's also true is that Russia tried, but they just failed. There's a whole history of Russia attempting to colonize Africa. They just failed. That's the only difference. If you Google Russia attempts to colonize Ethiopia, the history is there. Okay? And so but Russia had most of its success colonizing the Central Asia, Ukraine, the Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Dagestan, the Baltic states. That's their near abroad. They wanted to be just as colonial as the Europeans, but they just were not as good at it. That's all it is. And unfortunately, a lot of people on the continent of Africa don't know that history as well. Because and that's the whole thing.
Oh,
And
that's a whole nother thing.
right,
Yeah.
right. They don't know that history. They don't know that history. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this whole thing, that Ukrainians are a colonized and oppressed people, and they are. But we're so used to that language being used towards Africans that we don't appreciate what's happening in Ukraine. And unfortunately, a lot of Ukrainians have embraced the racism that the word colony and to be colonized is something that's specific to Africans, because with the Africans it's shame, right? We can't align ourselves to Africans. And so this whole idea of colonialism is just a new thing that's been spoken about extensively about Ukraine, because we didn't talk about Ukrainians from the perspective of being a colonized, oppressed people in a larger conversation, maybe in some intellectual communities, but in the context of the continent of Africa and Middle East, Ukrainians weren't talking about themselves in that way, and it had a lot to do with their own internalized racism. So all of this stuff comes together. It all
Yeah.
comes together, and what I'm so fortunate about is that the fact that not only did I grow up Black in this country, I grew up with the influences of Black thinkers um like the James Baldwins of the world. I understand critical race theory. I've read the books. And so I am able to employ these ways of thinking into the field of Eastern European politics, because it all is connected, because it all deals with oppression. And the only difference are the perpetrators and the people that they perpetrate, but the systems are identical.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, guys. So, I mean, this is just our little talk. I came on with Natasha to talk about these things, and I will be having lives 2 to 3 times a week now. And so I'm going to be on a schedule, and I'm looking forward to having on different um, experts, different people to talk about Ukraine, but really just exploring, if we just thought about this through the lens of race and how similar our histories of oppressions and struggles are, it can explain a lot what's going on in the news cycle.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
And I'm grateful that you are bringing that perspective because, you helped me be able to think about it in a different way or um, see it in a light that nobody else is explaining, and that's why this independent thing is, so important right now because the people in the mainstream aren't talking about it. And these are the things that I like to hear is what's actually happening, boots on the ground. What are people feeling? How are people faring? What are your experiences? Because you live through it half the year when you're in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So your voice is really important. And coming from your perspective, you're like one of the only Black Ukraine experts that I've
Yeah.
seen. So,
Yeah.
your view and your voice is really important. So I'm grateful that you had me on.
Yeah. Thank you. Hey, oh, of course. Thank you so much. And Jonathan, he said, by the way, thanks for drawing me to your coverage in Ukraine back from the MSNBC days. By the way, folks, when it's interesting, Jonathan, you say your MSNBC days. I didn't get paid a penny from these media companies. So people thought that I was a correspondent for them because I was on their network so much. No, I didn't get paid a dime. When I was on CNN, all these other places didn't get paid a penny. Again, that's another conversation. But thank you for following me still, right? Jonathan, I really appreciate that. By the way, yeah, you're not surprised. Well, again, that's going to be another conversation, Jonathan. So thank you all so much for coming on this live. By the way, if you are not a paid subscriber, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. I'm trying to get 100 paid subscriptions by the end of the week, and I am an independent journalist. I don't do anything else for my work right now, and so everything is invested in building this platform. In addition to building out my YouTube channel, which I'm going to be revamping starting in the next year, with on the ground reporting from Ukraine, and so I am going to be updating you more on what that's going to be looking like. And by the way, fun fact: these paintings right here, people think that a Black person painted these, but actually it was a Ukrainian from Western Ukraine who did it. This is a Ukrainian who only draws black people. I mean, people,
I
yeah,
love
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. People are so shocked by it, but yeah, these paintings were drawn. They were painted by a Ukrainian. Okay, so Natasha, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And you guys can follow me. I'm just kind of getting my Substack started, but if you want to follow me, I would appreciate it. I'm going to try to be going live a bit more as well. I do have another job, unfortunately,
Yeah,
but this is what I really love to do. I study a lot about what's going on, and I just feel like I have a perspective that I feel like we all kind of share, and just meeting new people and hearing your voices and just being able to dissect all of the information that's been thrown at us every single day 24/7 and being able to keep up with it. It's a lot, but it's kind of what keeps me sane, but it's kind of insane, which, whatever. But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love keeping up with it all. So this is what I would really love to do. And so I would appreciate it if you supported. Go ahead and follow me. And if you would like to subscribe, I would appreciate it. Truth She Wrote is my Substack. So you can follow me there.
Absolutely. So I'm going to be putting up this live in a few hours, so you'll all be able to see it, and you'll be able to get Natasha's information there as well. So definitely, please follow her. All right, guys. Thank you all so much, and I will update you sometime today or tomorrow on our next live, because we're going to be doing 2 to 3 of these per week with the primary focus on Ukraine. In the next 2 weeks, I'll be in Ukraine. I'm going to be experimenting with what it looks like to do some live do some live streams from the streets of Ukraine, talking to Ukrainian people. Okay, guys, have a good one. Thank you for coming on, Natasha.
All right. Thanks
All
as
right.
well. All right. Bye, everybody.